This is the Rebel HR Podcast, the podcast about all things innovation in the people space. I'm Kyle Rode. Let's start the show. Welcome back, Rebel HR community. Really excited for the conversation today. With us, we have Ash Beckham. She is a speaker and author of the book, Step Up, How to Live with Courage and Become an Everyday Leader. Ash, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much. Excited to be here.
Well, we are super excited to have you and really excited to dig into this topic because I think that this is one of those areas that, especially as people leaders or human resources practitioners, we get asked to be courageous at work and have uncomfortable conversations and do all of these really hard and humanistic things as it relates to leadership. But we don't necessarily always have the best idea how. And so I'd like to spend some time maybe talking through your thoughts there. But before we jump into that, I'd like to understand what motivated you to write the book and ultimately spend your time being a speaker on these types of topics.
Yeah, well, it was not always my intention, right? I mean, I never shied away from getting in front of people, but I feel like when you have human experiences, they were just stories that I would talk about with my buddies at the bar, right? Like of these weird things that would happen, this, the path that we walk down, and if you can't find humor in some of those things, I think that makes life a little bit more challenging. And so I, did a couple talks and then got traction with the TED Talk, and then all of a sudden was kind of thrust into this world. And for a while I did kind of the like, oh shucks, I'm an activist kind of deal. And then people expect you to be an expert. And I didn't know if I was ready, but I needed to be. So I was kind of riding that wave, but I would go to these, conferences or speak in these corporate environments, and people would say, Ash, I love what you had to say. When I ... when I am this leader, I will implement those strategies, right? When I get the promotion, when I get the degree, when I manage the budget line, when I have this many direct reports, right? There was this hesitancy that there was some sort of threshold people had to get to be a leader. And to me, that wasn't the case, right? The whole point of the book was that we're leaders by disposition, not by position. Because I'd be in these rooms and I'd ask people, who thinks of themselves as a leader? And, you'd range it and they're like, 50 to 60%, depending on the demographics. But then you'd say, who thinks of the person to the left of them as a leader? And everybody would raise their hand. So it was a self-perception issue more than it was anything else. And so the idea of the book is, no, you can do these things from exactly where they are, right? You have, your sphere of control, your sphere of influence, and then beyond that. But in your sphere of control, whether that's one-on-ones, in person, on your team, in your department, you can create the dynamics that foster a culture of belonging, right? And we all have the power to do that. We don't need a title or an office or any of those things to make that happen. How do we have that be more of a grassroots egalitarian perception of what leadership means?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I love that that saying. So I'm going to repeat it here. So, leaders by disposition, not by position. And I think as you kind of describe that feeling or that observation, so many people come to mind that have been extremely influential in my life, but have not been in a formal leadership role, but have certainly been leaders on a team I worked on or somebody that I just aspired to be like,
Yeah.
So I think that's really profound, really profound to reframe how we think about that. And I'm guilty, by the way. It's funny because it's like where I sit, I'm, chief HR officer, but there's still times where I catch myself like, when I finally get to there, then I'll be able to implement this. And it's like, wait a minute.
Right.
From an organizational leadership standpoint, I'm pretty sure I'm where I wanted to be 20 years ago.
Right.
Time to change stuff, right? Or time to take action.
And it's almost a lot of times I feel like as we progress, we think that we will be less risk averse, and a lot of times we become more risk averse, right? Totally. As we go through our career, we get to the point where that it feels too dangerous. Like those mistakes we're afraid to fail because the consequences seem so much greater, when if we're in the right work environment, we actually have the backing of everybody else on the team to fail. And we don't, we're not failing arbitrarily. We have the historical knowledge. We're making the decision. We're trying something new. We're being uncomfortable. But the risk, and in reality, the number of people that our decisions impact gets greater. So we actually become more risk averse.
Mm.
So I think that is what we're trying to break, is that idea culturally within the organization that we need to have a little bit of failure in these realms as well. And I'm not saying you like make this huge decision to pick the new company insurance because you're flipping a coin and you're just like feeling dangerous on a Friday. I'm saying, we think we go through these processes, but there is room to do it differently than we've always done it, just to try to see what kind of different outcomes we can come up with.
Absolutely. It's a really profound observation. I've never really thought about it before. It's funny how your brains like trick you, because I was just thinking, like, with that context in mind, I'm absolutely more risk averse than I was earlier in my career because there's more at stake. And it's
Mhm.
almost like here in my seat, I look back and I'm like, back then it didn't even really matter. It was so, I was just getting started. I could have really failed massively and it wouldn't have really been a big deal. And then back then I was thinking, just wait till I get to that point. I won't care anymore because I'll be so secure in my career and I'll be able to do all these
Mhm.
things. And it's like these self-limiting,
Yeah.
risk aversion, right? It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, and no matter where you are in your career, you have that. There's that little voice in the back of your head that's like, I don't know, which is, I think, important, right? That's that like gut feeling. I think when we're trying to do things that are courageous, when we're trying to push the envelope, we're trying to get out of our comfort zone. It's not the absence of fear, right? Like we always have that fear. The courage piece is to feel it and do it anyway, right? Because you know that there's growth in that moment when you're it's that pit of your stomach feeling. To me, that's like something we should do every day, right? And not high stakes every day, but we have to be able to sense that, know it, and act in opposition to it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that comment. And it's like, you're never going to eliminate fear. I also think it's really fascinating the way that we are all so wired to like protect, and it's evolutionary, right? I mean, we're wired to notice the negative things or to be more afraid of what's unknown versus. But the reality is, a lot of times we assume the stakes are a lot higher than they actually are, right? There's actually
Yeah.
there's actually a lot of room for discovery and learning and a little bit of failure as long as you learn from it, right? And grow. And
Oh,
that's actually where it
absolutely.
happens, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's always the anticipation of doing that. I mean, I feel like I have this conversation with my therapist on a regular basis, right? Of like,
Yeah.
the anticipation of doing the thing is always worse than doing the thing every single time. I mean, it's taken me 50 years and I'm still learning that lesson, but like, but that is, there is, and I think acknowledging that that is not something that we strive to overcome it. We don't strive to stop it from happening,
Mm,
right? We need to be working in concert with those internal instincts to a certain degree, because that's our barometer, right? It's how we know we are pushing the envelope, is
right.
to be in that space that is uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I want to circle back just for a minute. So earlier you mentioned you got a little bit of traction on a TED Talk, and just so the group understands, that's like 5.4 million views. So it's a little bit of traction. Might be the understatement of the at least the month. But I think and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. But I think it's a really really powerful message, and it's titled "Coming Out of Your Closet." And so I wondered if we could maybe in the context of what we're talking about as it relates to courage, talk about how you think about how everybody has kind of their own closet that they are working on coming out of, and what that means to you.
Well, it's kind of back to what we were talking about, is that like somatic feeling, right? Because courage isn't subjective. I mean, I'm sorry, courage isn't objective. It's subjective, right? What's brave for you, the only constant in that is that it's brave, right? And it doesn't serve me to compare my hard thing to your hard thing. That doesn't really get us anywhere. And I think that a lot of people, when I was starting to do this work, and my focus was initially in the LGBTQ plus community, and people were like, "Oh, I would never know I would never know what it's like to be gay. I don't know what it'd be like to be different than other people." And I was like, "Well, okay, sure, but have you ever had to tell somebody something and you were afraid that it was going to change their opinion of you?"
Mm.
They're like, "Yeah." I was like, "Well, same thing. Like, stakes are higher, things are different, whatever." Like, there are details that are not the same, but if you've ever done that, then that's close enough. Like, we can start having a conversation at that point. And I think that a lot of times when we're speaking of or about or to marginalized communities, we assume that that is such a unique experience. And yes, of course it is. And you have to understand that to be able to be an ally. But at the same time, the things that we struggle with are very, very similar, in that we all strive for social acceptance. We strive for a sense of belonging. We know what it's like to be excluded. We want to be in the in group. We all want to do that. It's just human nature. So it really isn't that different. And if we can bond on our similarities and build trust and build that foundation, then we can more easily step into those more difficult conversations because we trust intention in the other person, even if we see it differently, right? I think you can get to empathy there, because in empathy, like, you have to agree with somebody to be empathetic. And if that's okay, if I don't have to agree with you, I just have to be willing to imagine what it would be like to walk in your shoes. I can empathize with anybody.
Right. Right. I think that's really, um, really something that everybody in kind of a humanistic profession needs to be aware of. That it's really not about knowing knowing everything, agreeing with everybody's point of view. It really is about that empathy piece, right?
Mhm.
And I think a lot of times we throw around the word empathy, quite frankly, and I think we're actually defining it in a lot of cases. So walk us through what empathy actually looks like for you. How do you define an empathetic leader?
Well, I feel like we had you like you said in the beginning, right? When we have those initial thoughts, like, they say you're not in charge of your first thought, but your second thought and your first action, right? Like, when we see difference, when we see things we don't agree with, when we're in this world where we're making decisions so quickly in the middle of everything, it is human nature to assess friend or foe, right? And so I think that in again, like, in the high paced world that we live in, that's completely normal. But how do we take a second in that empathy piece? And that is like it's not just something you have. It's not you have empathy or don't have empathy. To me, you practice empathy, right? It's something that you draw on, and your time that it takes to get to an empathetic state hopefully shortens over time. Like, I think that that's the growth that we do. But to me, it's all about curiosity, right? I think we assume the best in people, and we're curious about why. Because in most of these situations, whether that's inside of work, outside of work, another parent on your kid's soccer team, another dog owner at the dog park, right? Like, that we're assuming best intent. Because at the end of the day, for me personally, and like you said earlier, like, if you're in human resources, you're an optimist. You just have to be, right? Like, you have to, you can't do the work that y'all do and not have an optimistic look, right? So, because I would so much rather be wrong by somebody that's a jerk than miss somebody that's good because I judged them first. Because I think a
Mhm.
lot of the times in the DEI work, we're so afraid about being judged. If I come out, what are people going to think of me? But we don't realize that we do the same thing, right? Like, we are judging people. And again, maybe for safety initially, but if you can assume best intent and be curious that this person just, like, arbitrarily didn't wake up and decide to be an asshole. Can I say that? Sorry.
Sure.
Like, you can cut it. You can cut it out.
Yeah, no, it's all good. No, we're
I'll
good.
say it again. Okay.
You can
I'll
say
say it again and
asshole.
use a better word. Um, that if you this guy didn't, like, decide to wake up and be a jerk, like, that is their human experience that led them to where they are, and they have beliefs that may be different than mine, and I'm rooted enough in my beliefs that a conversation with them isn't going to change my mind. But why? Why did they get there? Why do they think that? Why do they feel threatened by the new DEI initiative? Why do they feel like they don't need to be part of the conversation? Why do they feel isolated? When you get to the root of that, a lot of times, again, in this space, when you have like the straight, white, cisgendered male, often villainized in any of the DEI work. So of course you're like, if you don't feel like you belong, you're not going to try to be part of it, right? And so how do we reframe making a seat for everybody at the table? And that's not everybody that agrees with us, right? That's everybody at the table. You know, baselines of mutual respect, things like that. But I think empathy to me is that curiosity of you didn't just wake up one morning and become hateful or biased or any of those things, right? Like you got there for a reason. You think those things for a reason. Why do you think that? Let's get there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think, from my standpoint, certainly, um, always considered myself an ally, and as a part of that, always really kind of nervous that I'm going to say the wrong thing, right? Or going to be labeled as, pale, stale male, and
Yeah.
or worse, right? So it could be significantly, worse words than asshole have been used, I'm sure,
Right.
with people that look like me and mine. Um, but I think many of us are in almost in a state of like freeze, where it's like, well, we want to learn, we want to be empathetic, we want to be, we want to engage in that curiosity, but we're a little bit afraid, right? And I think that's an area that is an important conversation to kind of to elevate a little bit. That it's with the foundation that you mentioned, that foundation of trust, that somebody is coming from this from a standpoint of you know being a good human and just trying to make the environment great for everybody. um then we can, then it's okay to maybe make a mistake or say the wrong thing. And so, um I know we were talking a little bit about cancel culture before I hit record, but I'd like to maybe dive into that just a little bit in the context of how we kind of get out of that state of freeze where we feel like anything we say is going to be wrong, or even engaging in the work and kind of raising your hand as an ally is risky. So what guidance would you have for us as we're kind of continuing this practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing that always comes to mind for me is, some humility and some vulnerability, and that's not easy to do. So I think you create your trusted circles of people, honestly, where you can practice that conversation. You don't just like, and again, you have to have relationships first. You have to go around educating yourself. Somebody's going to come up to me and be like, you know, Ash, tell me how you and your wife got pregnant, right? Like it's like you're getting after it right away. If we're friends, I will give you more details than you would ever want to know, right? But if we have never had that conversation before, that's different. But also you would be surprised at how many people will actually dive in. My poor wife is constantly getting asked by I work for myself and she works at a big company, and she is like the token resource for all things gay parenting. That is like what she's doing. And she, it's awkward and it's uncomfortable, it's whatever, but people want to share their stories. Like we have to be willing to be awkward and really lean into that. And again, it's not the responsibility of LGBTQ plus people to educate everybody on homophobia, or our BIPOC friends to end racism, right? Like we're doing that collectively together. And you go in with a little bit of education, but I think if you can go in and say, "Hey, this is something I want to know more about," what are your biggest concerns right now, right? Is it what hits home? What's be like, not what are the gay issues of June of 2024, right? But how does it affect you personally? What are the discrimination policies like where your kids go to school? Do you have friends or family members that are transgender and they're moving, and they're trying to figure out sports and what that looks like? Like it hits everybody in a lot of different ways. And so how do you and I start a dialogue? Well, the easiest way to do that is for you to figure out what's most important to me.
Mm.
And then you go off, you do a little bit of education, you come back and have the conversation, and you kind of enter it saying, hey, this is something I really want to be working on. I'm really working on allyship. It feels really awkward. I'm going to try my best. I want you to be completely honest with me. Do you feel like you would be willing to be a resource? Right. And that's all it is, because I think there's so much empowerment. We talk about employee resource groups or, business resource groups and what that looks like. Yes, it's a resource for and a support. I think it started as a support network for people that identified with a certain affinity group, right? But now it's not just your gay employee; it's your employee's kid that just came out, right? Like it's the nephew of somebody, and their parents don't know what to do with it, right? Or they kicked him out, right? It is so much broader in how any of these things affect us than just the people that identify in that way, which makes a much, much bigger table, which is amazing. But also, I think there's an impetus, like you have to meet people where they are, right? They'll get there, but sometimes they need an olive branch, right? Sometimes they need somebody to invite them to the table and say, hey, in this space, you don't have to be afraid to mess it up. Like, I'll be honest, I'll tell you, you mess it up over and over, we've got problems, but I am a resource to help you figure it out, and I'm going to figure it out right next to you.
Yeah. 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 And going right back to, the kind of that curiosity piece. Right. And I think so much of this comes down to, an element of being authentic, right? Like this isn't like, like you're not going to go out and be like, hi, as a part of our DEI initiative, I am going to seek feedback on allyship from you. Would you,
Right.
like,
Exactly.
no, this is about like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm probably going to mess up. I want to learn, can we have a conversation? Right. Like, and if I say something
Absolutely.
rude, can you like be like, hey, that's rude, and like not be offended?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Like totally different context. But I think so often, especially in kind of my career segment, we kind of get coached to be these like robotic, like policy,
Yeah.
machines that are, and it really becomes really an uncomfortable situation. So for those of us that are maybe trying to shake that off and get rid of this like inauthentic attempt, what advice do you have for us to actually like bring our whole self into this type of work and into these workplaces?
Yeah. I think that it's having really honest conversations. Authenticity and transparency are two completely different things, right? I don't have to tell you everything to tell you enough. You and we're going to jump on a call, and you can tell that I am constantly checking my email. If I'm not telling you why I'm doing that, you're going to fill in the blank, right? Ash doesn't care about this conversation. She's disengaged. This relationship doesn't matter. If I say any of the things, 1,000 things that could happen. I'm waiting on a text from my family member who is letting me know how surgery went today. My kid is having a really hard time at school, and I'm waiting to get her. There's 1,000 things that happen because, again, we're human. And it isn't just our job title, and it isn't just my transactional relationship with you. Like, I am a human, and there are other things that are going to impact my ability to pay attention. So if I have a relationship with you where I can be like, Kyle, listen, today's just not the day, man. Like, I know we got to get this done. I'm here, but I am not my best self right now. Is there any way we can push it to tomorrow? Right. I've got these other things going on. That's enough. Right. If we're close, I can tell you my wife and I got in a huge fight. My in-laws are staying here. My dog died, like whatever. Like, we can go deeper, but just that ability to be honest of like, I can't do this now.
Yeah.
Can we?
Yeah.
I'm on a deadline. I've got this. My email's blowing up because we're supposed to submit this today in 2 hours. And you and I had this meeting scheduled a month ago, and I had no idea it was going to hit like this. And I just can't. Right.
Right.
How can you and I have that relationship where I can say that, and you now can't check this thing off your list, but you're like, oh, all right, how can I support you, right, in what you're doing? And
Right.
absolutely, you let me know when works for you. And then when you have to do the same thing, great. And I also know when you're like, we just got to bust it out. Can I just get 20 minutes? Right? Like, can we just knock out a couple of these things and I'll circle back to you in a week? But if we can say that and not try to hold all the things and spin all the plates and look infallible, and that our life outside of our Zoom screen doesn't affect us, is not, there's no way. And it's unrealistic and it just isn't real. And we all have those things, right? And some of us have either an ability or privilege to compartmentalize better than others, but some of us don't, right? And I think then you just get to know somebody more as a human. And the next time we have a call, you're like, oh, hey, how's it working for Luke at school? I know he was struggling and I just want to check in. Again, like we just know each other better as humans. That builds the trust, and it's a lot easier to have a hard conversation with somebody you trust than somebody you have this robotic transactional relationship with. So I think I think you can start it in with people that are safe, right? I feel like if it's a peer, right, you can have a group of people in the HR department, and I'm sure a lot of people listen are like, the HR department of one.
Yeah.
But that you have those relationships, because again, you're not one version of yourself when you open your laptop in the morning. Like, I feel like when we go into authenticity, it isn't something we do, it's something we become. And the more we practice it in other realms of our life, again, in these trusted relationships, we're like, I'm trying to say this and I'm going to stumble all over it. But I just, you feel safe to me to be able to say whatever I have to say.
Yeah.
Right. And then that's going to open up. That's a two-way. It's really hard when somebody is authentic to you to not lean in a little bit. Like
Right.
it's
Right.
Authenticity is wildly contagious.
Right. Yeah. It's, I think, well, I'll be honest, like, I think many of us struggle in this profession with when you open that laptop, you have to be somebody different, or you're supposed to be somebody different. There's like this perception of who you think you're supposed to be. I think this actually probably goes back to where we started the conversation, which is like this perception that, well, once I make it, now I can be my authentic self. Or, back when I was younger, it was easier to be my authentic self. But I actually, my personal experience has been that, like, by doing that, it was just like, it was a crash course for burnout. And it just really kind of sucks. Like, as I've gotten older, I'm like, screw that. Like I don't like I am not going to go spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week with my coworkers and be someone I'm not, or, I can't look myself in the mirror at the end of the day. Right. So it's also just kind of a self, like a misery index that I don't want to increase my misery by not being authentic at work. But it's easy for me to say that. It's a lot harder to do that on a daily basis. It's, we fall into these patterns of like just being robots and, kind of.
And it's like path of least resistance, right? Like, it's not easy to say, hey, Kyle, I can't do this today, even though we've put it off for a month, right? Like, but that it is easier to be inauthentic. It's exhausting and it takes much longer, but it is a lot easier and feels safer to be inauthentic. So it's the path of least resistance. But I would say, if you look at it, I mean, like, bring in the finance department. Like, think of the amount of time wasted deciding what version of yourself you need to be, right? Or how many ideas, like, if I can't be authentic, I'm not going to bring, like, innovation, creativity takes a nosedive, because if I can't even be myself, how am I going to bring up this wild idea that I had the other day? Because I think it's just going to get shut down. Right? Like, it affects the bottom line, it affects morale, it affects everything, but it's also easier. And when we're in these high stress environments and it's constantly there, and, with reorgs and downsizing and everything that happens, like, you're just trying to not screw up. You're living in this world where, like, don't let me be one of the ones they can pick off. Don't give them a reason. Right. And maybe my authenticity would be that reason. But I mean, the net stuck that takes on the organization is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I think you're not asking people to, all of a sudden, like, go to the meeting tomorrow and, like, just be your most authentic self. That's not what we're trying to get to. I think that it's, you go into, if everybody in the organization was 10% more authentic, right? and then 10% more, you know what I mean? And then you take that for a while. And then you see the positive growth from there. We're not asking a ton, and that feels a lot less scary, right?
Yeah.
Being 10% more authentic, I can lean in. That's like an hour a day. That's one of my calls a day that I have to be just a little bit more authentic on, and then it's like, rising tide lifts all boats.
Right.
And then
Right.
then there's this tipping point of culture where like the expectation is authenticity. And that's where we're all trying to get to, right? Is like that becomes our bar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would also, for people that are people leaders, managers, HR professionals, it's also a really, really important signal to send to the organization. Even like you said, like even if it's a little, like a 10% more authenticity, like, oh my God, like I'm sorry I'm late. My kids were throwing a massive fit. And you know what? It took me 5 minutes to get them calmed down and get them out the door today. So I'm sorry I'm late. Like that, you may have inadvertently just given every single parent that's had that happen to them in the last like 24 hours to feel a little bit more connected to you, and a little bit of like, I don't know, permission to be authentic about some of the struggles they're facing, and ultimately maybe some of the accommodations they need to be more successful at work. Right? Like there's so many
Absolutely.
like there's so many like veins, like those little actions can really really turn into bigger things. So wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Wonderful.
like at the end of the day, right? If you let's say you're staying late, you're gonna make a meeting, and everybody, the boss gets up and is like, okay, we're all gonna everybody take fives, like do whatever you want to do, or they sneak out or what, to say, hey, I'm gonna call my family. I'm gonna say goodnight to my kids. Everybody's got 10 minutes and we'll meet back here and we'll get after it again. Right. But whatever you need to do, that equivalent for you, go do jumping jacks, run the stairs, like whatever you need to do. We're taking a break for what your humanity needs because it's 8 o'clock at night and I know you're missing something.
Right.
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 That is, I mean, if you think of when you were saying in the beginning, like the leaders, the people that you look to as leaders that inspired you, that mentored you, they weren't perfect. Who wants a perfect leader? That's so intimidating. We want them to be real and honest. And they're
Right.
going to have faults, right? We all do, but that's what makes it relatable and connectable.
Yeah. Yeah. Really, really amazing message. I think I just absolutely love this conversation. I'm going to shift gears and we're going to go into the Rebel HR Flash Round. Are you ready?
God, I'm ready. Hit me.
All right, here we go. Question number 1. Where do we need to rebel?
I would say in the mirror, like do something hard tomorrow. Do something that you don't think you can, or that you don't want to, or that gives you that feeling in the pit of your stomach. Like own it yourself first.
I love it. I love it. Question number 2. Who should we be listening to?
The people that are the quietest. The people that don't have a voice, I guess, would be it, right? Like I think there's so much of having your voice heard that feels so amazing, but part of that is amplifying other voices. So I feel like figure out whose voice isn't there and get them to the table.
I love that. Not to take this out of the flash round territory, but like,
no, well, I've already ruined that. I feel like
it's all good.
My
It's
long
all good. Whatever. That's just the way to. But like, I think this is really, really powerful, especially in like today's workplace when we got all these like Teams meetings, and then you sit on a meeting for an hour, and I had it like an aha moment the other day, and we use primarily Microsoft Teams, and there's this like AI tool that tells you how much people talk, and it will literally tell you like how long, like how much airtime people have had. And I'm looking at this and it's like 4 people. And there's like 13 on the meeting, right? And it's like, so 4 people took an hour of our time. Did those other 9 people have nothing to say? No, of course not. I'm sure they had plenty to say, but for what, they just weren't the loudest in the room. And it like, for me, I'm like, okay, screw this. We're not doing this anymore. Like we're changing our meeting formats because this is not effective, right? Like that's so, side note, like, yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's even more important now in kind of how we work.
And I think that's a brilliant way to look at it, right? Either there were 13 people on the meeting and 4 of them spoke. So either 9 of them didn't need to be there.
Right.
Or 9 of them needed, or you need to have 13 people talking. And it probably isn't either of those extremes. but it's somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
And like, how do you get efficient? How do you value people's time and or their voice, right? Like it's two
Right.
of those things. Those are two incredibly valuable assets for every single member of the team. How are we maximizing those things?
Totally. Totally. Um, yeah. So side note, but
I
I
love
think
that AI
really
tool.
interesting.
That's amazing.
It's super cool. Yeah, it's like it's a transcription tool, and I didn't even think about it. We use it for the podcast, right? So I can see who talks and how long. So I
Sure.
use that to make sure that the host isn't talking too much. A lot of times, sometimes I'm better than others.
Fair.
But like you can use that in a workplace setting and like manage the extroverts, right? Because that's not always easy.
Genius. That is like such an A. That is the
There's a
AI
use
hack
case.
I am
There
here
you go.
for. Yes. Genius.
All right, last question. Maybe the most important one. How can our listeners connect with you? How can they get their hands on the book? How can they learn more from Ash?
Oh, absolutely. Well, ashbeckham.com is my website, and I'm on all the socials at Ash Beckham. And then the book is at any online bookstore where you buy it or independent bookstores. Step Up, How to Live with Courage, Become an Everyday Leader. I would love to be in touch with anybody that's interested.
Absolutely. Ash, thank you so much. So many just like truth bombs in this conversation. Just absolutely loved the connection and the conversation today. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kyle.
All right, that does it for the Rebel HR podcast. Big thank you to our guests. Follow us on Facebook at Rebel HR Podcast, Twitter at Rebel HR Guy, or see our website at rebelhumanresources.com. The views and opinions expressed by Rebel HR Podcast are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any of the organizations that we represent. No animals were harmed during the filming of this podcast.
Baby.